With us still with me here in studio, I-24 News Senior International Affairs Correspondent Owen Alterman. Owen, before the break we were talking about the diplomatic prospects or lack thereof at this point in time. Are we expecting any breakthroughs in diplomatic context between Russia and Ukraine?
Not in the immediate term. I don't think anyone's really expecting it in the immediate term, Ellie. But in the medium term, or even maybe the short to medium term, I wonder if diplomacy could play a role. As I often say in our broadcast, I think the problem at the moment is that the gap in expectations of the two sides of what they're going to achieve by continuing to fight is so wide that each of them, including the Ukrainians in an odd way, feels that their alternative to negotiating, meaning continuing to fight, is better than having a deal, right? And the Russian side, you can obviously understand why. They think they're going to win the war despite all the hiccups. On the Ukrainian side, they think they're giving the Russians a black eye. They feel a sense of momentum, and therefore they don't see a real reason to accede, at least to all of the Russian demands, right? And they don't feel that they're going to be a way for them to agree. I do think that expectation gap could narrow over time. And once it does, then yes, I think diplomacy has a real role to play.
And perhaps Zelensky's hint earlier today that he's willing to meet President Putin directly, perhaps that will be the way to gain some traction?
Well, it is notable that each of the sides has related to the other. Each of the leaders has related to the other in a bit of a different way. That's something we noted from the statements from the Kremlin and from the Russians a few days ago. They start to talk about Zelensky and give him more legitimacy than they had in the past. The name calling has receded a bit, if we shall we say, and them coming out and saying that they're willing to listen to his demands. Again, his demands, right? The demands of Zelensky, the man that they had said was essentially a Nazi. So again, we do see a difference in nuance. I don't think that's the critical factor. I think the critical factor is once that expectations gap starts to narrow, right? Again, the speculation right now is the Russians are simply going to escalate, and that in that sense they'll strengthen their position in the war, and therefore won't have any reason to make concessions. That's true, but in the real world, it's much more complicated. There's a reason the Russians didn't want to do that as part of their plan A, and may not be entirely thrilled about doing it as their plan B, meaning maybe their expectations of what they can gain in terms of continuing to fight is slowly changing, and maybe again over time that gives a space for diplomacy.
And in this respect, in the dynamic that we can witness, do you think that a plan C, D, or maybe E could be involving Jerusalem as mediator? Do you think it has a chance?
It's such a big question mark. I mean, it is such a big question mark. I think what we can say at this point is there's a lot of competition in the mediation game, right?
Yeah.
And Naftali Bennett's not the only person who's been throwing his hat into the ring. Or to be fair, that the Ukrainians have been have been asking him to take off the hat and throw it in the ring, which he has now essentially done. We've heard Recep Tayyip Erdogan say he's interested in mediating. Obviously, there are traditional countries that are in position to mediate with traditional neutrality in NATO-Russia affairs, like Switzerland or Austria, or Finland, presumably. I don't know that India is interested in mediating, but they may be putting themselves in a position to do so. So there are other claimants to the crown, if you will, or to throwing the hat in the ring, whether it be a crown in the ring, all the metaphors put together. So there is a lot of competition. The Russians don't seem entirely enthusiastic about having Israel do it, maybe because of its close alliance with the United States.
Or do it at all at this point in time.
Right.
And speaking of this long list of countries you've mentioned and many others, when the bid to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine passed tonight by a large majority at the UN General Assembly, along with Israel. The decision was supported by, again, a long line of countries led by the West. Only 5 countries voted against the proposal: Russia, North Korea, Eritrea, Belarus, and Syria. 141 countries supported it, including some perhaps interesting members: Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Qatar, and Egypt. 35 countries abstained, including Iran, China, Iraq, and India that you've mentioned. Owen, so which countries were a surprise to you? Which ones were tilting until the very end?
Yeah, in my ranking of surprises, Ellie, I think number 1 on my list has to be Kazakhstan. I mean, just think about it. What, a month ago, right? Vladimir Putin basically goes in and saves the Kazakh regime. How do they thank the Russians, so to speak? They abstain.
Yeah.
Don't even vote against.
That's
they abstain. I thought that was a bit striking. Beyond that, the UAE is the other one that really caught my attention. So studiously neutral, right, over the course of the last week. They have that seat on the Security Council. They abstained at the Security Council, but not today. They voted in favor. That definitely stuck out. As has been commented by our colleague Mike Wagenheim, American allies in the Middle East in general really came to bat for the U.S. here, right?
Yeah.
Egypt, Saudi Arabia, other Gulf states all supporting it. So obviously a good day for the United States here in the Middle East. Also getting some attention, the abstention from South Africa. I think a telling, in some sense, vote for South Africa, a vote that's really going to hurt South Africa. South Africa puts itself out there as a country that is a standard bearer of human rights, certainly in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, abstaining and putting out a statement that's, again, so very neutral in a case like this one is going to badly hurt the South African brand after, in a sense, it was really helped by South African conduct during the Omicron wave, right, alerting the world and so on. So I thought it was, as opposed to India, which abstained, but in fairness, India doesn't put itself out as an evangelizer on the international stage differently. So I think the South African vote is going to be something we hear about in the years to come.
Interesting to think about the ramifications of the diplomatic decision of each country. And obviously, when it comes to the UN General Assembly or the UN as a whole, the inevitable question, any teeth to this resolution? What's the next step?
Directly speaking, no. There is no teeth to UN General Assembly resolutions. They're not even binding under international law, unlike Security Council resolutions. But this is an important vote. Let's not lose sight of that. I mean, Vladimir Putin did not expect to have a vote with 141 countries voting against him and only a handful, was it 5, voting with him. This is what happens when your plan A on the battlefield fails, Ellie. For all we talk about the justice and the merits of the Ukrainians' cause, obviously that's part of it, but another part of it is the failures and the underperformance of the Russians on the battlefield. That barrier of fear is going down, maybe not yet really inside Russia, but certainly in the foreign policy arena, in international relations. If countries had been scared of Russia's reaction, well, that barrier of fear is lowering, maybe even here in Israel a bit. And I think that's really brought to bear in this vote, and just how overwhelming it was.
And we will have more on the economic element, the economic sanctions that is on Russia. But we do know that the United States is planning to introduce more, most notably on specific Russian oligarchs, and also other, let it be the EU and other countries are planning to do so as well. Are we seeing an impact of those sanctions at this point in time?
Not yet, I don't think. I mean, we're obviously seeing a big impact for the financial sanctions, right? Look at the currency, look at the stock market, and look at the rest. But you're right. The game, I think, is going to shift to the oligarchs, and this is tough. This is a warfare in the urban alleys, right? If the financial sanctions is dropping the bomb, okay, from 30,000 feet, this is the trench warfare. This is the urban warfare, right? To go after individual yachts that can sail away, to go after apartments, to go after houses, to go after children at boarding schools, right, and not have the boarding schools at least be shamed. I mean, this is the real trench warfare of the sanctions. It is a tough fight because each of these oligarchs is going to, again, legitimately so, try to find legal ways to defend themselves in these democratic countries which have independent judiciaries, right? They have the money and the resources to hire attorneys, to hire accountants. They have rights to due process, right? They do, and they're going to be using them to the fullest, and it's going to be very, very hard to